Consider supporting me on Patreon to see my videos a day early and receive other fun perks. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, 2021 was rough for me. A lot of people consider 2020 the big hell year for obvious reasons, but it was actually fine for me. 2021, on the other hand, I had a lot of mental health issues due to stuff going on in my personal life, and that leaked into the way I enjoyed games. My anxiety led me to deconstruct the way I viewed, enjoyed, and judged games. I wound up developing an insecurity, not just with games, but with entertainment in general, where I spent way too much time agonizing over whether or not I was enjoying something as much as I should. You can kind of see it seeping through in my last games I played video. Basically, whenever I kind of enjoy something, but I'm not that into it, I worry that I should be enjoying it more and that there might be something wrong with me. So considering the fact I developed that issue, 2021 must have been a terrible year in terms of the games I played. Right? Actually, no. I played some really great stuff last year. In terms of gaming, 2021 was kind of the opposite of 2020 for me. That year, I played a lot of good games, but very few great ones. Here, while I only had 20 games I considered for the list, as opposed to last time when there were nearly double that many candidates, the games that made the cut this time are a lot better than last time. So it's time to prove that I'm not crazy or falling out of love with games or anything, and go over some of the really great stuff I played this year. These are my favorite games of 2021. In case you're new here, these lists are about the games I played for the first time that year. It has nothing to do with when they came out. Also one per franchise, and let's just jump right into it. Okay, I guess it's a rule at this point that I need to play at least one gay cyberpunk visual novel each year, and this time it was Song of Farsa. Despite the way I phrased that, this game actually has more in common with something like Orwell than VA11 Hall A. You play as a private eye and solve all your cases from your apartment as you do research on the people involved, interrogate people, and of course, hack into various locations. Like I implied earlier, the information gathering process has a really similar feel to Orwell, only with more variety, and that's good, since I really liked the way investigating people in that game was handled. It's a really cool feeling, being able to find out everything you need to know about a case just from going on your computer. While there are a few duds here, most of the cases were really cool, often making you think and having a good deal of suspense. Despite all these positives though, there are a few things that keep this game from making it any higher. For starters, I think it goes on a bit too long. Not by much, but I think cutting one or two cases out of the equation would have done wonders for the pacing. Also, I'm very mixed on how they handled your choices in this game. Without spoiling anything, there was one case where I made a decision that I almost instantly regretted, and I couldn't go back and change it, which is good because it left a sense of guilt I haven't felt in a game since Beholder 2. It's a really good example of how a game can make you feel something because of the choices you made. On the other hand, there was another case that was probably my favorite because of a choice you had to make, but you get information later on telling you that your choice didn't even matter, effectively ruining the case. And above all else, I really didn't like the ending. If I ever find enough candidates for a Worst Finales Round 2, this game is definitely going on there. Before we get into this next one, I should clarify that I'm counting the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles as one game. I know it's technically two games, but I'm counting them as one because unlike the Ace Attorney trilogy, the Great Ace Attorney games are so similar and so interlocked they feel like two parts of the same game, rather than two separate games. And if I'm being honest about how I remember them, I do kinda just see them as one game. My thoughts on the Great Ace Attorney are complicated to say the least. To start with, remember that insecurity about worrying I'm not enjoying games as much as I should? Aside from Ratchet & Clank, this was probably the worst instance of it. Why? Simply put, I do not like the pacing in this game. There were plenty of moments that felt really slow and dragged out, mainly in the courtroom segments. I never had an issue with it in past games, but here, it feels like way too much time is spent on small details that don't add much to the case. Plus, as far as witnesses go, I think these games have a lot more duds than the others, and while Lord Van Zykes has a great character arc, he isn't that entertaining in the courtroom. Unless he's saying something relevant to his story storyline or it's a big moment in the case, I honestly found his dialogue and mannerisms kinda boring. But with that out of the way, everything else about this game is great. The presentation is really good. While I'm not the biggest fan of the backgrounds, the character models are all really expressive and the music is fantastic. It's so bombastic and emotional and really adds to the feel of the game. My personal favorite tracks are the jury theme and the main themes of the two major prosecutors. These games also add quite a bit to the mechanics of the series. Things like questioning multiple witnesses at once, the great deductions, and my personal favorite, dealing with the jury, added a lot to the experience. Also, despite what I said earlier, there were still plenty of good case-specific characters, like Sosuke, the Gyarados, Enoch Drebber, the baddies, and my personal favorite, Magnus McGilded. Then, of course, there's that story. While some of the cases weren't super interesting individually, that gets made up for by the incredibly strong overarching story of this game. Every case, aside from 1-4, contributes to the grand narrative, and seeing the arcs of characters like Gina, Ryunosuke, and Lord Van Zykes go through makes things that much more satisfying. Also, Herlock Sholmes is amazing. Literally every boring moment in this game felt worth it whenever he was on screen. I can't stress enough how awesome this guy is. Out of every game on this list, Inscryption was easily the hardest to rank. Part of me thinks it should at least be in the top 10, and part of me thinks it shouldn't be on the list at all, so I think this was a good compromise. Before getting into why I'm conflicted, what do I like about this game? For starters, the card battle system is a lot of fun. It's easy to learn, but has a bunch of layers to it that make for a lot of tense battles. The overworld is great too, offering different paths that allow you to upgrade your cards, get new ones, and do a whole host of other stuff. This is made even better by the wide variety of cards, and the sacrifice mechanic forces you to make tough decisions both in battle and out on the field. The system does have a lot of ways you can break the combat, but the game makes you work for those overpowered combinations, making them more of a reward for clever thinking rather than an example of poor balancing. And since it's a roguelike, it's not like you keep said combos forever. The atmosphere here is great too. Leshy's cabin has this really creepy feel to it that's bolstered by some of the unsettling things you have to do to progress. Plus, each area you make it to has its own distinct feel, with Leshy narrating everything and portraying every character with his masks. It really makes each run feel like a big, tense adventure. So, what's the problem? It's pretty simple, really. Everything I just described is only the first third of the game. Once you make it out of Leshy's cabin, things change drastically. Instead of this cool, creepy cabin, you have a pixel art style that's pretty ugly, especially in battles. The roguelike structure is changed to an RPG where you have to build the decks yourself instead of making do with what the game gives you, and instead of one really well-constructed battle system, you have 4 that feel stitched together and really clash with each other, especially if you are unfortunate enough to pick Magnificus. I know the final third is more similar to the first, but I never made it that far. Now, normally, me stopping a game this early on because I didn't like it would completely disqualify it from this list. But here's the thing, you don't have to leave Leshy's cabin, and I don't mean that in the typical way of, oh, you don't have to finish a level and go on to the next. So long as you don't solve all the puzzles in his cabin, you can just keep doing the roguelike forever. In fact, the developer heard the feedback and is working to expand the Leshy side of the game into its own mode, with more content and greater challenge. But I can't judge this mode because it isn't done yet. You see how this complicates things, don't you? As for the story, it's fine, nowhere near as good as the Hex, but I like the idea that all the Dan Mullins games take place in the same universe, and it makes me eager to see what he makes next. It's been forever since I've played a WarioWare game. I think the only one I've played that counts is DIY, so I'm not a super fan in the series, but the gameplay style was fun, so I decided I'd give the new one a go, and was not disappointed. This time, the big gimmick is the different characters you play as. They all play a little differently, leading to a nice variety, even if some of them are borderline unusable. In case you're wondering, 5Volt's my favorite. All of these levels look and sound great, and the themes and mini-stories with each one really add a lot. While the actual story mode is pretty basic, it's still a lot of fun. I especially liked how they managed to use the characters for some surprisingly epic boss fights later down the road. Then of course, there are the extra modes, which I really need to give a try at some point. Most of what I said is just window dressing though. At the end of the day, WarioWare is based on a really simple but really fun gameplay style, and I had fun with it, which is really the most important part. Man, I need to get back to this game. If only I wasn't so busy with all these other games. As the years have gone by, I've become increasingly sick of stuff breaking the fourth wall. It feels incredibly played out, often taking you out of the experience to tell a lame joke or make a point that isn't nearly as profound as the writers seem to think it is. That's not to say I don't like anything with fourth wall breaks, just that if a piece of media is going to make it the focal point, it's got a really high bar to clear for me to like it. And thankfully, There Is No Game Wrong Dimension does just that. Rather than just breaking the fourth wall as a joke, it's the main gameplay mechanic. This is a puzzle game where the solutions involve messing with the mechanics and even the interface in some of the craziest, most outside-the-box ways possible. Each chapter changes up the mechanics considerably, and a good deal of them parody various video game genres. My personal favorite was Chapter 5. The game also has a narrator that stays with you throughout the whole game, and he's the perfect mix of funny and sympathetic. It really feels like you form a bond with him as things progress. I can't say that much more, as I don't want to spoil just how crazy the puzzles get. All I'll say is that this is one of those puzzle games that I'll probably replay at some point, despite knowing the solutions to the puzzles, just so I can see everything unfold again. I'm not the only one who does that, right? Ever since I saw its reveal at the 2020 Game Awards, I've been intrigued by Road 96. The idea of a procedurally generated road trip with different story events was a fascinating one. Even if the game wasn't that good, I'd be curious to see how it would work. Luckily for me, the gimmick works and the game is really good. Basically, you play as a teenager trying to escape from an authoritarian government that seems to specifically have it out for teenagers. Does that last part sound kinda stupid? Well, don't worry, it's just there for motivation. The story doesn't go into the why, it just provides a threat you need to avoid. Anyway, each run has you managing your money and energy as you go through a random series of events where you interact with different characters. Most of it is just walking and dialogue, but there are some mini-games to help keep things interesting, and a few decisions you can make that impact the story. I like the way they handled the choices here. There are a couple of big choices and a lot of small, interchangeable ones that build up over time, and they make it clear what your choices are affecting so it doesn't feel like a Telltale game. You may have noticed I said each run, and that's because the game doesn't reset when you escape or get captured. The story keeps going, you learn new skills to help you along the way thanks to the different events, past methods of escape get cut off after using them, successfully or not, and of course, there are the characters. With the exception of a few filler events near the end, every event involves one of the 7 major characters in this game, and with each one, you get to know them a bit more and progress their storyline. It's interesting because since the events are random, it doesn't matter what order you see them in for the most part. They all contribute to the storylines. Sure, you won't be able to complete all the storylines before the game ends, but that's the price you pay for randomness. Each character's memorable in their own way, from the hilariously vapid Sonia to the outright terrifying Jared to my personal favorites, Stan and Mitch. The game's also great at creating the feel of an adventure. These may be random events, but each one's an important milestone in your journey to escape. And despite going on at least 5 trips in a playthrough, each one feels special in its own way, almost like a roguelike walking simulator. At its core, this game is essentially one interesting idea executed to perfection. The main premise of Destroy All Humans is pretty simple. GTA, but it's a classic 50s alien invasion movie, and you're the alien. The game's depiction of the 1950s has a lot of charm and gets some laughs, although I don't think it's quite as funny as the game seems to think it is. Likely because I've seen the 50s satirized so many times at this point, the jokes feel kind of played out, which isn't necessarily the game's fault since it's over 15 years old. Still, the 50s aesthetic provides a good atmosphere that enhances the main appeal of this game, the gameplay. This game is just a lot of fun. There aren't that many weapons compared to something like Saints Row, but each of them feels unique and they're all fun to use. The disguise mechanic provides a nice element of stealth, and flying around on the jetpack is a lot of fun too. The missions also had a good deal of variety and were really fun for the most part, and they're bolstered by the different locations. Much like the weapons, there aren't a lot of them, but each one feels fun and different from the others. Really, what you see is what you get with this game. If you want to be an invading alien and go ballistic on 1950s America, this one's for you. You know, at this year's Game Awards, when I saw It Takes Two get nominated for Game of the Year, I thought it was a pity nomination, and that it wouldn't have even made it that far in a year with more releases. Yeah, I was wrong about that one. As you can probably guess, I never hated It Takes Two, I just didn't expect it to win. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. In case you didn't know, I'm not the biggest fan of co-op. This is mainly due to not wanting to go through the trouble of finding someone to play with, but I'll admit I'm especially skeptical when it comes to 3D platformers. Between Super Mario 3D World and Epic Mickey 2, co-op was kind of a dirty word to me. It Takes Two managed to prove me wrong, likely due to just how much of the game is designed around it. As in, all of it. Everything is designed around having two players actively talking to and cooperating with each other. At no point did it feel clunky or forced. It was all completely natural. And that's without even touching all the various gimmicks that get introduced, changing up the gameplay and forcing players to work together in different ways. They're all a lot of fun and never overstay their welcome, except maybe the stuff in the tree level. That went on a bit too long for my taste, but it was still a lot of fun. Speaking of the levels, they're great. Mechanically, they mix things up incredibly often, and they're all a visual treat. My personal favorite is Rose's Room, due to just how much stuff you do, but all of them have something to offer. The only real drawback to this game is that if I want to play it again, I have to convince someone else to play it with me, since the co-op is not optional. But considering how good the game is, that shouldn't be a hard sell. I've had a complicated relationship with the No More Heroes series. I liked the first two games overall, but both of them had serious flaws. With the original, it was the overworld and how it dragged the game's pace to a crawl. With 2, most of the levels were pretty bad. Does 3 continue this trend? Kind of. The bosses in this game feel too easy compared to everything else, until you use the time machine to refight them, which is a feature the other games really should have had. And aside from that relatively minor issue, and some graphical problems, this game is great. They made the gameplay loop really satisfying. Instead of fighting wave after wave of enemies and levels, you just go to individual battles and fight the enemies there to unlock the boss. The regular enemies are a huge improvement too. Instead of just being generic mooks that act roughly the same way, there are a bunch of different enemy types that force you to fight more strategically. The new additions to the combat are great too. Sure, the jump is freaking stupid, but everything else is cool. This is the first No More Heroes game where I felt like I could constantly stun enemies and suplex them. The roulette that pops up when you lose is a great way to keep you from getting discouraged, and the Death Glove adds so many dimensions to the combat, it's kind of insane. The overworld, Call of Battle notwithstanding, is pretty great too. The mini-games are better than ever, and the bike actually controls well this time. The story is just the right amount of insane. It's not to the point where it's incomprehensible like Killer is Dead, but everything involved feels weird and out of nowhere in all the best ways. I can't count how many bizarre fake-outs there were in this game, and I was laughing at or excited by almost all of them. Not sure what's next for Suda, since he says this is the last No More Heroes game, but it also ends on a cliffhanger. So does that mean there's a spin-off coming? I don't know, but considering what he pulled off with this game, I'm sure it'll be a good time. 2021 felt like the year of the 3D platformer. There were so many released last year. It Takes Two, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Here Comes Nico, Blue Fire, Demon Turf, Balan Wonderworld. Hey, I didn't say all of them were good, just that they were released. With all these options at my disposal, it makes perfect sense that my favorite one I played last year, aside from the obvious one we'll get to later, didn't even come out last year. Crash Bandicoot 4. I haven't played the original Crash games, but this game certainly makes me want to. I'll admit I was skeptical about the super linear platforming style, as that isn't typically what I look for in a 3D platformer, but I wound up really enjoying it. The core gameplay's fun, it offers a lot of variety, and despite how thoroughly it kicked my ass, it never felt unfair. Keep in mind, I never went for 100% because I know how fruitless that is. Pun not intended. My only issue with the gameplay was that the new characters felt underutilized. Instead of full levels, they mostly just got mini levels that tack onto an existing Crash level, which is a disappointment, but that's my only real issue. The game also looks great, the character animations look nice, and each world looks so vibrant and distinct. I can't be the only one who thought this game looked better than Rift Apart, right? I'm not crazy, right? I'd love to see another one of these games, but it looks like that's not happening anytime soon. Well, at least I still got the original trilogy. It seems every year or so, I stumble across another competitive multiplayer game that I frequently come back to. This time, it was 100% Orange Juice. Funny story, I was worried this game would be too complicated for me to figure out, and then I proceeded to win my first match. People describe this game as Mario Party, but without the mini games and way more brutal, and while I think there's an element of truth to that, I don't think it's the full story. For starters, this game moves really fast, not just because of the lack of mini games. Everything is just fast-paced, which makes things more interesting and means you spend less time waiting around for it to be your turn. Also, people tend to characterize this game as just random bullshit, when in reality, it's the perfect mix of randomness and strategy. Sure, your movement and actions in battle are controlled by dice, there are random events, and the cards you get are random to a point. However, everything else involves a lot of strategy. Whether to defend or evade in battle, when to use your cards, what cards you want to bring into the game, what type of normal you want, and of course, choosing your character. 100% Orange Juice has a ton of characters to choose from, and each one has its own stats, hypercard, and sometimes even special abilities or handicaps. This means virtually every character has at least a slightly different playstyle, so you're able to constantly mix things up. Sure, most of these characters are locked behind a paywall, but you still have a decent amount in the base game, and if you're as into this game as I am, $70 isn't that high of a price to pay for this many characters, especially since the game is so cheap. At the end of the day, 100% Orange Juice has the perfect mix of strategy and luck to create a deep, chaotic, and fun party game. So about a year ago, right before Cyberpunk came out, I put out a joke poll asking people if I should get Cyberpunk or Bugsnax, figuring the answer was obvious. Turns out it was obvious, just not in the way I was expecting. I thought I would like Bugsnax, but I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. What this game has going for it above all else is charm. I love the Bugsnax designs. They're all really creative, and seeing them in action just adds to the immersion in these areas. And of course, catching them is a blast. I've seen some criticize the puzzle mechanics in this game, but I enjoyed them just fine. The easy to understand nature of capturing Bugsnax made it a lot of fun to experiment and use what I learned to capture the snacks I needed. I almost never feel motivated to 100% games, but the fun designs and puzzle mechanics really made me want to catch them all, and I did. There's also the Grumpuses, these weird Muppet creatures you interview and do missions for. Despite their goofy names, appearances, and voices, they're all really deep, fleshed out characters who have their own serious personal issues that they try to solve with Bugsnax. I always love it when media has a balance of goofy weirdness and dark seriousness, and this game treads that line beautifully. I was invested in all of their storylines by the end, and you better believe I did all their missions. In the end, Bugsnax is a beautiful game that mixes the childlike wonder of hunting for all these neat creatures with many of the issues that come with adult life. A weird mix for sure, but a fun one nonetheless. You know, a small part of me wasn't sure about putting Persona 5 Royal this high on the list, due to how burned out on it I felt by the time I was done with it. But then I realized something kind of obvious. It took me 130 hours to finish the game. Of course I was going to feel burned out by the end. The fact I was willing to stick with it for that long just goes to show how good it was. Where do I even start with this one? How about the visuals? This might just be the best looking game I've ever played. I mean, just look at this. It's insanely stylish in the real world. You know, the part of the game that's supposed to look normal and less interesting compared to the metaverse. When you're actually in the metaverse, it's on a whole other level. As for the gameplay, it's a lot of fun too. The whole time management mechanic is even more fun than it was in Persona 4 thanks to the sheer variety of things to do. It's kind of insane just how many options you have. Sure, Tokyo doesn't have as much charm as Inaba, but when you have so much stuff going on, does it even really matter? As for the stuff in the metaverse, it's a lot of fun too. These intricately designed palaces are a major step up from the randomly generated dungeons of Persona 4. Each one feels like a real adventure to go through. The stealth also adds a lot, as does the ability to negotiate with shadows to recruit them to your side, and of course, building a powerful persona is just as fun as ever. The story, characters, and soundtrack aren't quite as good as Persona 4, but they only really look bad compared to that game. They're still really strong here, aside from Morgana, and the Okumura arc, and the finale, but we're here to talk about the good stuff. Honestly, I was so burned out after playing this game, I wasn't sure if I was going to play Strikers, but now that I'm remembering how much fun I had, I'm really excited to play it and jump back into this crazy, stylized world. Remember last year when I said this? I tried out a good deal of roguelikes this year, 2 of which I actually liked. Neither of them were Hades though. I'll get to that one when I get to it. Yeah, well, I got around to it. Really early on in the year actually, and it lived up to the hype. When I first saw Hades, I honestly didn't expect much from it since the whole isometric zoomed out combat style never really interested me. But when I played it, it wound up being my favorite roguelike, even beating out Isaac. So why is it so good? Well, for starters, there's the element of strategy. There's still plenty of randomness in this game, such as what enemies you fight, what rewards will be available to you, and what boons the gods of Olympus will offer. The important thing is that you usually get a choice in the matter. Most rooms have multiple doorways, letting you choose what kind of reward you'll get, and whenever you get a boon or some kind of bonus, you get to choose what it is out of a small set of options. It always makes for some fun strategizing, trying to find the best way to enhance your character on each route, and deciding whether to give yourself a bonus that'll help you in that run, or something you can take with you after it ends. The combat itself is a lot of fun too. Each of the 6 weapons has a unique playstyle, and the combat system gives you just enough variety to keep things interesting without it being overwhelming. This, combined with the different enemy types and the general sensation of slashing through foes, makes virtually every encounter fun. And then of course, there's the general feel of this game. Everything from the artwork to the music to all the characters you meet convey the feeling of a Greek epic. I'll admit I wasn't as wrapped up in this game's story as a lot of other people were, but I still enjoyed the characters involved, and the way they would evolve through the many runs really added to the experience. As a result of this theming, each run feels like an epic journey. It was always a cause for celebration whenever I made it further than before. And I'm saying this as someone who hasn't even beaten the game yet. I've made it to the fight with Hades, but I haven't actually beaten him yet. But that's okay. I know I just need to keep trying until I make it, and that really is the beauty of this game, isn't it? Before we get to number 1, it's honorable mention time. There aren't as many this year as there were last year, so this should go by pretty quick. Deathloop. I loved the concept, characters, and the way they told the story, but I just couldn't get into the core gameplay. Fury was a lot of fun at first, but the life system made losses so crushing I eventually quit. As of recording this, I actually went back to the game and beat it, and I might even find a way to fit it onto the next Games of the Year list, but since I finished it after my cutoff date, it's not going on here. The Dark Side Detective, a funny, charming point-and-click game. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart had plenty of good moments, and plenty of moments where I wasn't really into it. Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, a short, simple, funny, and fun Zelda clone. Coffee Talk, basically VA11 Hall A, but it's fantasy instead of cyberpunk and coffee instead of alcohol. It's still good, but not quite as good as VA11 Hall A. Shady Part of Me, a good, atmospheric puzzle platformer where the 2 leads have an engaging dynamic. It takes a bit to get going, but when it does, it really gets going. Omori, A good game all around, but I honestly wish I never played it. It broke me that much. Like, this isn't a joke, I genuinely wish I did not play this game. Life is Strange. Not a good game in the traditional sense, but pretty good as far as ironic enjoyment is concerned. Deltarune Chapter 2. Would have made the list if I didn't have a rule against putting incomplete games on here. Yes, I count episodic games as incomplete. Don't worry, Deltarune, you'll get your chance when you're finished. Night in the Woods. I really wish I could put this one on the list. I might have even made the case of it topping Psychonauts 2, not as a game overall, but as a game of last year. I didn't really get it, per se, when I first played it years ago, but I do now. It was the exact right game at the exact right time for me. Were you expecting something else? Let's face it, the moment you saw this game was coming out this year, you knew it was going to be #1 unless something was seriously wrong with it. There isn't a whole lot I can say about Psychonauts 2 that I haven't already said in my review, at least about the game itself. So I guess I'll focus on the more personal side here. I've been wanting this game to exist for about a decade at this point, hoping for a game to continue the creativity of the original Psychonauts and fix its many, many flaws. And it did just that. Sure, the game isn't perfect, the combat feels tacked on, the interns suck, except for Sam of course, and the badges weren't very well thought out, but those are small gripes for the most part. Especially since this game delivered just about everything I wanted it to, aside from the humor and soundtrack, which I think were slight downgrades. The game's got tons of gorgeous, creative new levels that all tell a unique story, and the real world is just as fun, with all of its open areas that are practically begging you to comb through them for collectibles. It's all held together by tight platforming and a strong, emotional story. The funny thing is, after all that waiting, I wasn't entirely sure how I would react when I finally got to play Psychonauts 2. Especially given the serious slump I was in at the time, I was worried I might not even enjoy the game. And when I finally played it, it was surreal that I was actually playing it. I'll admit, I didn't feel blown away like I was expecting to. For the most part, there were a few moments like the big plot twists and exploring a lot of the open areas for the first time. For the most part though, I simply felt satisfied. And you know what? That's enough for me. Heck, for a game where my hype was so astronomical it's hard to describe with words, that's damn impressive. And that's why this game makes it to #1. I loved almost every second of it, and it was a nice relief from a dark time for me last year. I am Defoffilizer, and I don't even have many games I'm hyped for this year, aside from clearing out my backlog that's even bigger now than it was in 2020. But that's fine, I'm sure I'll play a lot of fun games along the way. Before I go, a big thank you to Natin Gitman Schlut, Danger Sushi, Mark Erickson, and the SMR for supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to have your name read out at the end of the video, or see my videos a day early, consider supporting me there. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you're interested, and check out the ones featured on screen. Bye!